didn't need it.
Hi, is that working? Thank you, Jonathan.
Yes.
I have so many people to thank. Thank you, Patty.
Hey, thank you. My goodness. Thank you for inviting me. I'm just going to turn my phone off.
Thank you all for coming out. Thank you to Rochelle Steiner and Albert Chow from Artpark for inviting me to do what we're going to do on Sunday. It's been in the pipeline, that project, for I can't remember how long, but as soon as there was the opportunity to come to Buffalo, yes, I immediately went onto the interweb and looked up indie bookstore, and Talking Leaves immediately. It felt like I've got to visit.
Yes, that's entirely appropriate.
It felt too good to be true, and now we're here, and I feel, I've been on this book tour since April 4th. The Language of Trees was published April 4th, and I've literally gone cross country and back, and at each event I've been pinching myself. It's really happening, because I honestly, Tin House have been incredible. We were just talking about whether you get the opportunity to have a book tour or you don't, and I feel very, very lucky, very privileged, and honestly when it was being planned all through the winter I thought, they're kind of crazy. This is never going to happen because I'm suffering from a form of long COVID called dysautonomia, and it leaves my autonomic system broken. So my heart is out of control, my breathing, my brain, all of those things that should happen automatically, hence the autonomic part, has forgotten how to do that. So I'm all about trying to remember. So bear with me if I kind of get out of breath or my brain goes blank. I have the form of brain fog that goes white out. So literally I was pinching myself going, at each event across the country, we're here in real life after emailing, and I'm just so thrilled to have it. Feels like the final conversation, because on Sunday we're going to be all together, right, from 11 until 2 in our park outside under the trees, and we'll have conversations.
And it's supposed to be nice out on Sunday. It's supposed to be beautiful. Rainy tomorrow, but then beautiful on Sunday.
And
You should hold her.
Oh, sorry.
And so, but this conversation, us together, feels like the last one that I'm doing on this leg of the tour, and it feels like such a beautiful way to wrap up for me, even though it's like the beginning and it's our first time meeting, because I have a uniform for my book tour. Laurie Arbiter is an artist in New York and does a reclaimed language project. We Will Not Be Silent. So I have different t-shirts with different messages. I feel like the book itself, The Language of Trees, is a series of messages and actions and call to actions. And so for tonight it felt Remember the Future was the right message to maybe throw at you.
Yeah.
Because your book is so much about trying to remember and remember and reimagine, and like we right now are writing the future, and there are so many things that I was hoping would be part of. You can see I'm like doing, I love books.
Yeah, I've got sticky notes as well.
I love real life, books in real life. That there are so many things that we could talk about. Where do we begin? So the future, I feel like there's so much to be hopeful and happy and positive and heart filled with joy and all these positives. Like for me, that's where all my work comes out of love. And you might see, I should mention, all of these images are related to the book in a way. The Language of Trees was made in the last year, so it was kind of a state of emergency. It happened very quickly, but it was really like 20 plus years of work that feed into it. So we can talk about images, we can have a Q&A when we're done, although we won't be done having a chat. But where to begin in the future?
Well, for me, so my book came out of a desire to understand how did things get so messed up, right? How did these countries that built themselves on these ideas of promise and possibility, how did everything get so messed up? And so I start following these threads back. And it kept going all the way back until I'm talking about creation stories. Because of course, these are the ways that we understand ourselves. And unforgetting was a phrase I came across in an interview of the historian Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. And she's talking about it's more than remembering the past. It's unforgetting these things that at some level we know, but we've kind of officially forgotten. We don't talk about them, we don't think about them, we just kind of make assumptions about them. And I don't know, I was reading your book, and I feel like trees are part of that, like if we just listen to them. Because in the Ojibwe worldview, and I'm now reading, or rereading, I should say, the Hebrew Bible and Environmental Ethics by Mary Jorstedt. She's a Hebrew scholar from Norway, I think. Anyway, but just this idea that the world is alive in ways that we don't understand. And that more animist worldview, which we tend to think of as being very primitive, but that's just because anthropologists think that way. It's more of an understanding that the world is alive, that it's full of people, only some of which are human. And so when we think about that, and we think about trees, and we think about what memories of us do these trees hold? I belong to a hand drum group, and periodically we get invited to participate in a class that a friend of ours teaches at Brock University, and we sit outside around a fire, and we sing and we drum, and we talk to the students. And one night I was doing this, and I caught myself, I was looking up at the sky, and we're canopied by trees because it's on the escarpment, Brock University. And I started thinking, do these trees know these songs? Do they remember these songs? And if these trees aren't that old, did their parents tell them? Did their parents tell them about older songs? And are we bringing them comfort by singing them again in this place? And so as I'm reading your book and I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about all of that memory and relationship. There's a wonderful essay in there about the networks that travel between trees carrying information. And my kid would go bonkers. I'm so sad that he couldn't be here. He calls himself a tree nerd. He lives in Peterborough, but it's the Hiawatha powwow this weekend, so he couldn't come down.
I think community, for me, this book is called The Language of Trees, so it's about trees, obviously, but it's about people, it's about community, and it's, as you say, if we just could listen to the trees. A lot of the work that I've done that, led me to create a tree alphabet was the simple notion of if we stop and look and notice street trees in Manhattan. I've been living in New York for a while, and you have street trees. That's the contact with nature. And again, what is that word nature, right? Because humans, we are nature, but we've kind of disconnected ourselves from it by having that word. So we're playing with language, and if you replace the letters of the English alphabet with the tree, how does that slow you down and make you look at the trees and then at our own language? And then we could talk about language and the English language and the damage that's caused. I feel like there are so many
directions we could go in.
Yeah, how do we contain this conversation? Where to next? But yes, definitely, if we could only slow down, and then I keep talking about tree time, to try and think in this more circular, cyclical way, rather than this straight line that we've been led. I'm Irish, I grew up in Ireland with the nuns teaching me, and everything was black and white, good and bad, evil and past, present, future. And that's, there's so many amazing things in your book, but the physics, the quantum physics,
yes,
is something. So, and you just mentioned the,
I was just thinking about Chanda as you were talking about that.
I wanted to be a physicist when I was a little. My brain doesn't quite work that way, but the drawings, a lot of my drawings have always been trying to investigate and understand how things work, and maybe that's why I end up working with language, because that's, a man-made system to try and communicate and understand the world. And as humans, we are storytellers, and we need to communicate. And the science and the math is another language to try and understand and communicate the world. But the way of speaking to, I think this would be wonderful if you could articulate what you talk about in the book, about the animism, and this is something Robin Wall Kimmerer, felt so important to me to include her words about the grammar of animacy and this proposed pronoun ki, K-I.
I love that, and I'm gonna use it.
Me and my partner Dylan, we try and so instead of calling other beings, non-human beings, to use this word ki. It's very difficult, and Robin also says it's very difficult. But it breaks. It's another way of breaking us out of our human-centered ways of thinking and disconnecting between everything else. I've made a stone alphabet because stones are alive, and it's something that you talk about in your book too. Sorry, I feel like I'm just fangirling.
There's just so many
threads,
so many overlaps, so many different things. So so the animism and the animatedness of the Ojibwe world, and the understanding that stones are alive. And I tell this story about when I was in high school and we were studying the signs of life, right? There's things have 6 criteria in order to be alive. I don't remember what they were. High school was a long time ago. But I remember that there were 6. And our teacher asked us if stones were alive. And we were like, no, obviously not. And then he says, are you sure? And we thought, okay, this is obviously a trick question. So we went through the criteria of life, and again, no, they're not alive. They don't meet really any of these criteria. And then he says, maybe they just do it too slow, and we can't measure it. And then he says, or maybe they do it in a way that we don't know how to measure. Or maybe our criteria are just wrong. That's science, right? Is always the asking of questions and the because race science was cutting edge science for a while. So there's always the possibility that the science needs to be re-examined. So I don't think that he believed that rocks were alive or that stones were alive. I think he just wanted us to think. But I have become convinced over time that stones might be alive. That and when you think about quantum physics, and my friend Chanda Prescott-Weinstein is a physicist, just ridiculously smart woman, but talks about it in a way that I understand it, and it's all about the relationships and understanding that things can be both matter and energy at the same time, or matter and light at the same time, or I forget how it goes, but it can be 2 things at once. And the Ojibwe language, we talk about what something is being rather than what it is. And when you think, I'm also an abolitionist, so when you think about that from a system organizing point of view, when you criminalize somebody, you're saying what they are, and you're setting them up forever to be that person, to forever disclose the thing that they were charged, that they were convicted of in an attempt to get another job. They always have to disclose that. Which means they theoretically paid their debt to society, but it gets dragged. And that's only because they got caught. We don't know how many people are in these jobs that never got caught. So it really is just the illusion of safety. But in our language, we would not talk about that as a thing they were. It's a thing they did. And you can always mitigate and deal with and change. And and even my leggings aren't black, they're being black. And anybody who has dropped bleach on something understands the temporary nature of whatever color your clothes are. Yeah. It's just such an interesting way of thinking. And I have always been taught, as Robin was, that our language divides into animate and inanimate. But Lawrence Gross, an Anishinaabe teacher, says that's not entirely accurate. Because even things that are inanimate can take action. It has to do with what is their relationship to us and to each other, as to what they're able to act on or be acted upon. And so he said, he would say, all things have the potential for animacy.
Mm-hmm. I love this coming into relationship. You've said it a few times, and I feel it's what we've come to learn. When I say we, I'm a white lady from Europe. We are seeing the harm that has been caused over so many centuries, and we need to come together in community to try and remember, relearn, and teach ourselves. Like a lot of gatherings happened after George Floyd's murder online, because we were all online with Zoom. White ladies would get together on Zoom, thousands of them from all across the country and across the world, to try and gather to talk about our ignorance and the knowledge that we had. It's like, we think this is right. How your teacher was saying, "Are you sure?" Maybe we're too slow.
Sure?
And I think that's it. Like, we've been told these stories, and they are stories. And for me, it was really important, to think about creation stories. This is something that again and again came up when one of the images here is of us hosting a salon at home. Unfortunately, my partner Dylan couldn't come tonight, but Dylan's and the two of us would, I like cooking, so we would cook and have dinners and conversations. Again, it keeps coming back to people and stories, but we would invite people over to talk about the possibilities for art and activism in the Anthropocene. So this was something we started in 2014. What can we do? This sense of urgency, but also hopelessness. These issues are so large, right? Our species is teetering on the brink of extinction, and we've pushed all these other species to the same place. We've changed every biological system on the planet. We've moved from the Holocene to the Anthropocene. And what can we do about it? We feel hopeless. So we said, let's invite people into our home. And so we would have gatherings, salons, Sunday salons, to talk. And every conversation we had would end up back with stories, needing new stories, and also to relearn the old stories, the creation stories. So and this book started as a book that I made in 2015. So that book was called About Trees and used the tree alphabet. So it's really at the heart of this book. But so I feel like these conversations with others is what led me to make this kind of collection, a compendium of voices, but looking way back in order to really think about this future that we're making together in relationship.
Yes, and I love that about it, that it's just all these different voices, some of whom I agreed with more than others.
Yeah, but I want to hear about some of the ones you don't.
But I just like you said, it always comes back to relationship. It always comes back to, and I heard the most interesting thing. I was at a conference last week, and the young woman who was speaking at the one panel, she says, community doesn't need you, but you need community. And then she says again that community isn't something we do things for, it's something we do things from. And I just thought, like Earth doesn't need us, right? Like in the Anishinaabe creation story, it follows kind of a familiar trajectory, but each layer of creation is complete on its own and doesn't need what comes next. But whatever comes next needs everything that came before. And of course, when humans get here, nothing comes after us. So we don't have that level of relationship where we have agreed to take responsibility for something, and yet all of creation has agreed to take responsibility for us, right? We need all of creation. Creation isn't something we do anything for.
And I realize now that I was bringing up in my last, it wasn't the question. I wanted to focus on relation and bring it to the fact of creating groups. And so it's something that comes up again and again in your book, like find others, do something, take action. And this is what I found just in my own world, is that creating, so this feeling of hopelessness, you see, this is where the brain fog, I start something and then it just dwindles to nothing. But it just kept reminding me of this group that I co-founded a group called Friends of Ardee Bog. This is in Ardee, Ireland. The peatland is under threat from the Irish government. They want to build a road through it. And as I've been going cross country on this tour, meeting lots of different people in different communities, who are all, as everyone everywhere is seeing trees threatened and other ecosystems, and having to come together in groups, because this is where I was going with the salon, the fact that we were feeling powerless and helpless and useless, and an individual shouting into the void. But when you come together, you do create something that's more powerful, and that's the most important thing that we can all be doing. Really, well, and
what you're doing is you're creating that space that people can do something from. Right? That's exactly what you're doing, is you're doing exactly what this young woman was talking about, is you're creating that community.
There's the 3,500
Oh,
tree.
there it is. That people can take action from. And as we do that, and as you create your circles and I create mine, and you guys, we reach out to each other and we build that world. But it's like you say, it's in those relationships. Understanding that the earth doesn't need us, but oh, she loves us. And she wants us to be in good relationship with her.
It all comes back to love.
Yes, yeah. It's not like when we say, oh, somebody doesn't need us. It's like they're flipping their hair and mean girling out of town. It's like that's not what it means. It just means that she'll get along okay without us, but there's still grief. There's still that longing for reciprocal relationship. They promise to take care of us. And then we have, in some ways done well, and in other ways not so much. But I heard somebody say, but she keeps her promises, even when we don't keep ours. The rocks, the trees, the animals, they all keep their promises, and so that's like this potential opportunity for a do-over. To keep trying, building things exactly like what you're talking about, places that people can, and look what emerges from those kinds of things. Books emerge from those kinds of conversations like this emerge from those kinds of things. They're going to go home and say, oh man, I know I got to do something. I got an idea. I've got an idea. And all you need is one person to disrupt with.
Yeah, the last conversation I had was in Portland, Oregon, and not Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine. I love Portland, Oregon. Yeah, Portland, Maine, and someone was inspired to set up an Extinction Rebellion group. Because they said, I've been trying to find the local group and it didn't exist, and I realized as you were speaking that it's me, I'm the one who's going to start the group. Like, yeah, that's how it works. It's up to us. We all think, somebody else is in charge. When you're small, you're kind of told the adults are in charge, they know what they're doing and they take care of everything, and then as you become older and you realize, wait a minute, I guess I'm one of those people. We were just
making it up.
We're all making it up.
Really know what's going on.
Exactly, and then you see the politicians, and we don't want to go there, but that's like out of control crazy. So it's up to us. We are the ones we've been waiting for, right? That's like, I can't remember who said that, but it is literally, we all have the power to make something beautiful. Mm-hmm. It's that simple, but we all feel overwhelmed, and time. Mm-hmm. It's all moving too quickly. So again, I come back to the trees to try and slow down and get into tree time and stone time. Because you said it, that your teacher said it, that maybe we are not able to read that slowly. We can't see the stones move, because obviously stones are alive, because that's the plate tectonics, right? Our whole planet is moving and alive. And it's changing constantly, but we don't see it in that way unless there's the awful earthquake in Turkey, for example, that happens. Like a rupture, but the time, it's the same as language and communicating. Like we know that trees are communicating because now scientists like Suzanne Simard have done the experiments over decades, and we can capture it and see it in the science again. But we don't hear it, so it's in another level that's not our way of communicating. So it's just a different way of communicating that we don't have access to, because we're so primitive. Our species is so, we can't photosynthesize.
We're so new.
Yeah.
Really, we're so new in terms of how old everything is. We're just figuring it out.
Although my poor body feels like it's...
I know, my knees do not feel new.
But the potential for where we go next, obviously scary things are happening, like AI. I don't know if you've been...
Has anybody watched a movie? Why do they keep doing this?
The Terminator.
I know, right? If they not watch movies, this never goes well.
But they're gonna, it's, geeky. If you can do it, do it. That's some of the arguments that some of these scientists have, that it's got to be done. If we don't do it, China will do it.
Yeah. I mean, Jurassic Park, right? You're so busy thinking you can do it, you never ask. So everything for me comes back to movies.
Are there any movies that you feel speak to your book or the language of trees or any of these? Is there anything that you...
Okay, I watch scary movies. I don't Twin Peaks was what just pounced into my brain. I don't know if you guys have watched Twin Peaks. Well, it takes place in the Pacific Northwest. Lots of trees.
I've seen
Reservation Dogs. I've actually not seen the most recent season.
So brilliant.
It is a funny show. I do have a story about old trees though, but I meant to tell because there's a bit in your book where you're talking about the woman who takes core samples, and she's studying climate change over time by taking core samples of these of trees, and because she's looking for very old trees, it takes her on all kinds of amazing treks. And she talks about this one tree that had fallen down and basically laid there dead for 800 years, which is pretty mind-boggling to think about, that a tree doesn't get consumed by anything over a period of 800 years. So a number of years ago, I was at the Petrified Forest. I take road trips like Billy from Family Circus.
Is this the same one that I visited with Forrest Gander over in California, or is it another one?
It's in Arizona.
Okay, different one.
Yeah, it's right by the Painted Desert. So I mean, there's petrified trees and all. Anyway, so we get out of the camper and we're kind of walking around and we're looking at these trees that just laid down and turned to stone. And I'm looking at all of these trees, and it's like a whole forest just one day went poof and just laid there for millions of years. And I start thinking about this. I start thinking about these trees laying there for millions of years with nobody collecting them for firewood, like no humans. Kindling, yeah, nobody collecting kindling, nobody building houses, animals not burrowing into them, like just these. Anyway, I freaked myself out and we had to go. Because time just started to feel so huge and out of control. And I found my husband. I was like, we got to get out of here. I can't be around these old trees anymore. And he's like, okay.
The cover of my book came from a series of walks with the poet Forrest Gander over in California. It was Emergence magazine brought the two of us together, and it was the last project I did before COVID came, because it was the end of 2019, and I made the drawings February of 2020, and so we created a poem, a multimedia piece called Forest, and so the drawing grew out of that. But
I love that drawing.
One of the walks was in our regular old redwood forest, where you have cathedrals of trees, just stunning. And then another one was a petrified forest. And I looked it up after I saw your tweet, and it's just called the Petrified Forest. But I think it was an ancient volcano, it's not volcanic anymore, erupted, and that consumed and turned them all to stone. And yet there is that sense of time's paused, time's stopped. And
because you can see the rings.
Right.
It looks like trees.
Yeah, but it's rock.
It's extraordinary.
Then that made me think of this drawing here, which is of the oldest fossilized, it's a fossil of a tree that's, now I can't remember how many, because my brain's broken, how many hundreds of millions of years old it is, but you can see how the rings are different from the tree rings that we know today. It's the earliest form of a tree. And so there are 8 different times throughout history that tree forms, because a tree is just a large plant, have come. So they might go extinct, and then nature will always find a way, or life will find a way.
Jurassic Park. Life will find a way.
The tree form is universal. Trees will just keep coming back. There'll always be trees. We'll be long gone, but there'll be trees.
And who knows what will be living under those trees telling stories.
Yeah, the advanced, something much more beautiful than us. Well, I think there is a lot of beauty in humans. I know that, it's been a really difficult couple of years.
It's been a difficult couple of years. Sometimes that gets really hard to see. But your book pulls together so much of that beauty and so many different ways of being in relationship with trees. I mean, that was something that I really liked about it, was all the different ways. There's a beautiful story in there about, it's kind of a sad story, about the tree that got cut down and he got the lumber and turned it into his desk. Well, my husband has a sawmill. That's what he was doing all afternoon. And so the bathroom vanity that we have.
I believe you admitted that.
Well, because he gets trees that other people, he's not cutting down the trees. he's getting them from people that have, and he goes and picks them up, or they're the ash, because of the beetle, whatever it was. And so that's what he does. He rescues them so that they don't get kind of just disrespected. And so our bathroom vanity is black walnut that he rescued. And so like kind of that whole, so you would have loved my son Ben, because he's worked tree planting. He spent years working as a tree planter. He fights for years he was fighting forest fires, working in apple orchards. He is a tree nerd. He should have been here, but oh well.
Maybe another time.
Another time.
I'll
send him to New York City to hang out with you.
But this is just the beginning. Oh, there I am with forest.
There you are.
But you can see the tree. You can see
look how it spirals.
Right. And there's a form, some kind of fluorescence.
He would know. My kid would know.
Yeah.
My kid would know all about those roots too, and how they talk to each other.
This is my group friends Bog outside the Dáil delivering our petition to the Irish government and the ministers to ask them to please not build the road through the bog.
Please don't.
And the Irish tree alphabet. So that's the one thing I didn't mention about so at the heart of the book is the tree alphabet. So everything's translated into trees. And I've made the fonts, available so everybody can download the font.
That's cool.
And write with trees. But then I realized once I've made a tree alphabet to make a book that you could also make a tree alphabet specific to a place. So you could have a planting palette that's for New York City or Ireland. And so I've gone and, since I made the font for the book, that's it right at the beginning. Ta-da! I've made the Irish tree alphabet. So we're hoping that one day we'll be able to plant messages with trees, plant people's dreams and time capsules.
I think that's really cool. So if I was a tree, I would actually probably be a black spruce. Which isn't exactly a pine tree, but your pine tree kind of looks black spruce. Black spruce.
Oh, you'd be a black spruce?
Yes. And I don't know why, other than black spruce are northern trees, and my father's family is from the far north, the medium north, so north of Thunder Bay. And
so we could clip some of your the leaves in springtime and make tea.
Yes. Black spruce are beautiful trees, and actually, what's really funny is K, which is the first letter of my last name, the Kentucky coffee tree. I'm addicted to coffee. Appreciate that. But yes, the black spruce, I think that would be me. I like the black. There's just something really extraordinarily beautiful, and I don't know, the far north is just a really beautiful place as well.
And so speaking of north, that's making me realize that I'm at the tippy top of the state of New York, very far up north here, right by the border, and you actually crossed the border to get here tonight for the talk. Thank you. I know it wasn't easy getting through that border.
But I forgot it was the Friday of Canada, it's our holiday weekend.
Oh,
yeah, we celebrate Queen Victoria's birthday on Monday. I don't know why.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, I didn't. I completely forgot. I'm retired. I don't even know what day it is most of the time. So, do I have to go someplace today or no? That's really all I know.
But do you want to talk a little bit about borders or place? Because I know on Sunday we haven't talked much about what we're going to do on Sunday, like our conversation there. But you did say there might be a bit of a land acknowledgement or to talk to place, because we're at this special place with the waters, the rivers. So even though we're inside and we're not outside under trees, but just to give us that sense of place and where you see where we are right now.
Yeah, so this area, so my father's family is from northwestern Ontario, so way top of Lake Superior, so kind of north of Duluth, right? Thunder Bay and keep going. But what's really cool is the water from our community, Lac Seul, flows into Lake Superior and then down through all the Great Lakes and past the Niagara River where I live. And so I am connected to home from this place, from being here. The water that travels past is water from home that came down. My cousin was probably fishing on it a couple of months ago, and now it's traveling through. And I don't know, maybe it's telling stories to the trees around here. about my family so that the trees down here know a little bit more about me. And I think that's a really cool thing. But this area was the Haudenosaunee, so the Six Nations, so that's a confederacy, Seneca, Onondaga, and Mohawk, I forget. But they're the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I am Anishinaabe, and we all kind of lived here. Also the Huron people and the Neutrals, we all lived here in relative peace. We made a treaty, the One Dish Treaty, and you don't make treaty with people you get along with. You make treaty to resolve conflict. So we made a treaty, and this is an extraordinarily wealthy area. I don't mean wealthy like rich people live here, although they do. I mean wealthy like, do you guys remember the 100-mile diet when that was a thing? Well, around here, you could do like the 20-mile diet and find everything you could possibly need for a healthy diet within walking distance. And I'm not talking about stores, I just mean like the potential to grow things. And the fact that we keep paving over it and building on it is just a really disrespectful use of our ancestors, because it's still like all of this is made from earth, right? It's made from, so we're surrounded by our relatives, but we've enclosed them in ways that they never intended to be. So we're not separated from nature, we're just in a really artificial version of it. Yes, Zoe Todd taught me that in a podcast conversation. And she was such a disrespectful way to treat our ancestors. And so now I think about that every time I'm like walking on pavement or something like, ooh, dinosaurs, that's rude. Shouldn't be walking on dinosaurs like that, that's rude. But that's this area, and I mean, so of course it's gonna be hotly contested, right? The British wanted it, the French wanted it, the Americans wanted it, Canadians wanted it. We won, by the way, which is why we're Canada and not the US, because the War of 1812 fixed that border between the two countries. But borders are dumb. I mean, like, so I can move freely, right? I can go back and forth. You can go back and forth because we're blessed with these Canadian and American passports that allow us to travel.
Yeah, I brought my Irish passport just in case I get over.
Yeah, but then we think about the ways that other people are not permitted to travel, right? Like migrant labor, the borders are a real barrier for them, unless of course we want them to make stuff for us, and then they're allowed in, but then they get deported as soon as their job's done. And you know, as Indigenous peoples in this area, we never lived that way. Right. We lived in these layers of relationship which forced people to get together and to work through conflicts rather than just like, you know, build fences and borders and allow us to ignore relationship.
Because migration is natural.
Yeah.
It's something that should happen. People, animals, plants. You know, Chelsea Scudder, I was in conversation with her in Portland, Maine. Her essay in here it's actually the last one, it ends the book. You know, we should bear witness because the forests
the forest migration, yes.
But we don't see it because it's happening at us, although we are seeing it, and everything's speeded up with the climate crisis, but that in general they move.
The maples are moving north.
Yeah, slowly at a different timescale that we can see, like right now in front of our eyes. But the that word wealth, you when you use the word wealth, I automatically was thinking of all those white guys with money, and I don't know how many people here were thinking of the same thing. But that's
what I mean. Like it wasn't just like the rich people living here. I mean, they do live here, but it's not that kind of wealth.
Exactly.
It's the wealth of.
That's how broken my brain is. That I associate the first thing that comes to mind is this.
But that's also why I corrected. Instead, pointed that out because my brain went there too.
That we're in the
that's the way we're trained to think about wealth, and wealth as something that we hoard rather than something that we share. Rather than something, because I mean, we used to just give everything away because we knew that our community would take care of us right back again. Mm-hmm. And we no longer live in a world that facilitates that. But we can build small collectives that do that.
Yeah, I think working local, right? So you mentioned the 20-mile. The more local we can be, the happier, the more natural way it is to be, right?
And build trade networks that are mutually beneficial, that aren't just extracting wealth from the global south and parking it in fancy neighborhoods. That's, reciprocal trade, because we had extensive trade networks, right? But it wasn't this kind of extractive thing that colonialism does, whether it's moving knowledge or people or stuff, just so that it can pull what it wants and then discard the rest.
I don't know if we are at the time for questions.
I don't even know what time it is.
Yeah, I feel like we could go on for days. But the migration thing does make me I want to do a small shout out for Emergence magazine. I don't know if you know Emergence, but so I mentioned they brought myself and Forrest Gander together, and that's where the cover came from. But Emergence exists online. They also print beautiful volumes, really gorgeous, luscious books. And their 4th volume is ready. It's over in Europe. It hasn't quite arrived here yet. But the 4th volume's on migration. And so I think you're the kind of person that, I'm going to have to share you with Emergence.
I'm going to have to look for that.
Yeah, part of that community of storytellers. And because, so many of the people who are in here are part of Emergence. Robin and Richard Powers and all these good people. But yeah, if there are questions, if there aren't, we can just keep going, because I don't have any sense of time. Are we okay? We can keep going?
I think you can maybe go for about 5 minutes
Okay,
more,
great.
and then have some questions.
So did you have a question for me, or should I throw a question at you?
I don't have any questions off the top of my head. See, now my brain stopped working. I'm just looking to see, what did I highlight in here? Oh, the branch thing was really interesting. I think, so I walk my dogs through a wooded area every day. And you mentioned about the branches that Leonardo da Vinci noticed at first. That the branches all add up to the tree trunk, and the branched parts off the branches add up to the branch that they came out of. And so now I walk on my dogs looking at the branches.
But this is something that with my own work for forever, because my dad was a mathematician and worked with numbers, and my mum was a gardener. So when I talk to students, I start off with, I'm really the product of my mum and my dad. But it took me decades to realize that it was their 2 worldviews and ways of living and loving the world is kind of how I am now in love with the world. But to understand it through the numbers and the calculations, how things are related to other things, and the organic, the growing, the plants, and that cycle of life, those organic systems together because these images are related to the tree book, but then there are all the other works that I make that aren't here, but that I wish I had thrown in some of them now, because they would make perfect sense and visualize what it is I'm trying to say, but about how we stitch together this world through, again, it comes back to trying to understand. So with the branching story, it's these underlying mathematics, for lack of a better word, that creates the world. I studied complex systems at the Santa Fe Institute. It was a MOOC, a massive open online course, way before COVID. It was years ago. But it was a way to try and understand, because I think complex systems are really part of so many things that we are trying to break down. So environmental humanities programs are popping up, and a lot of them started during COVID when we were all gathering online. To communicate, because you're breaking down the barriers between the different academic disciplines, right? So artists, we're lucky that we get to do that all the time, because you can just work, you can knock on any door and talk to a scientist and an academic in some really niche field and bring them all together and do things that they can't normally do necessarily because they have to be in their field. And where am I going? Oh, so the branching. Yeah, so bringing together, that's one of the beauties when you make a book like this, that you can bring all these different things that maybe aren't always put together, and it just offers other ways of maybe entering or throwing out a pebble, and it causes ripples, and then there are other ripples, and how things are connected. But yes, how things work is super fascinating.
It is, and that was something that I really liked, was the way the way the essays connect to each other unintentionally.
Or maybe
intentionally, I don't know, I have never edited a volume before. I just mean that they didn't seem to be deliberately talking to each other, but you place them together in such a way that they do.
Yeah.
And they bring different ways of examining it. And so I mean, the walk with my dogs every day is different now because I'm looking at the trees and noticing things because of the people that you've put together here, and they're making me think, and then that collides with other things that I'm doing, and this is just such a lovely volume.
Thanks. Well, I'm glad I'm helping with the dog walking. But it's about, trying to see things, right? It's that simple. Or seeing things that we see all the time. And the book actually, shout out to my editor Maisie Cochran at Tin House. It was her, she was invited to make a beautiful book, like her dream book. And after the years of COVID and how trees had helped her, she told me, she said, Katie, I just wanted to make a beautiful book about trees. It's that simple. She was so grateful. She hadn't really realized, the rest. I'm putting words in her mouth. I don't know if this is exactly what she said. She'd always loved trees, appreciated trees. But with COVID, the shutdowns, the lockdowns, all of that, the trees offered her another way of seeing the world and existing, and all of the comfort. A lot of people found that through sowing seeds, planting, through
making
bird
bread.
watching, making bread, all of these things that people maybe didn't have time for before. And so Maisie, that's when she reached out to me and said, I want to make a beautiful book about trees. So it's kind of thanks to COVID maybe. So out of awful things, good things happen. But it's as simple as trying to offer, and that's what I hope the tree alphabets do, another way of just stepping outside of our human-centered way of being too quickly in the world. Everything's happening too quickly. To try and slow down and look at all these non-humans.
We don't have to. I think it's a very capitalist way of being in the world because we don't have to move this fast. It's like, okay, so I'm retired, and what happened was I was doing social work and it broke me, and my brain said, you gotta slow down, and we're just gonna put big old brakes on you and prevent you from moving fast. And then I retired, and I'm like, well, everybody should live like this. Everybody should have a roof over their heads and a guaranteed income and access to food. And look at all the things that I'm creating. Right? Like, it's not like I haven't stopped working and just okay, I did at first because my brain wasn't working. But I'm not just sitting on the couch watching TV all day. I'm building my own circles, like the salons. I built a whole series of those conversations online, a different podcast, where I pulled together thinkers. I called them writers and civilians. So it was a couple of authors or academics, and then a couple of people that would just like to read their books. And I just put them in conversation, and let's, shake the snow globe and see what happens. And some really neat, and that's actually my next book project, is taking these conversations and turning them into a book, because some really neat stuff happens when you get people, like you say, out of their silos. And talking, like I had Daniel Heath Justice, who wrote a couple of wonderful books, one about a badger and one about raccoon, for the Reaction Animal series. And he also writes what he calls wonderworks, they're kind of like fantasy novels. And I put him in conversation with Chanda Prescott-Weinstein, who is an astrophysicist specializing in dark matter. And I put them in conversation. I could listen to those two for hours. It was magic. And yet you wouldn't think that they would have a lot in common, and yet they did. They had so much in common. And so doing exactly what you talked about, these salons, I had them virtually, and just putting people in conversation and imagining some kind of better world. What could we do? It turns out we can do a lot.
Doing all of that after you retired.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Everybody should have that capacity to not have to work, 2 jobs. Like my youngest has to work 2 jobs to keep a roof over his head. Right. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason that we're kept in debt and busy and all, focused on the basics of, just kind of keeping body. And there's a reason for that. Because when we're not so busy trying to stay alive, we can have these conversations and then
Yeah,
real
really-
things happen.
really make the world a beautiful place.
Yeah.
But those people at the top, they don't want that. They're scared.
No, exactly. Yeah, that's like old ladies who get more radical with age. 'Cause
Yeah.
what are you going to do? Call HR? Please try.
Yeah, because that's it. It's
I have no
all-
HR department.
You know, these books are just full of the love and the beauty, and it's about trying to keep that down, the suppression of it. That's,
Yeah.
all of this goes
Well,
back
and we
to
get
that.
isolated. They don't want us to have these relationships and conversations. They want to keep us in our tightly economically controlled neighborhoods. You know, in our racially divided communities. You know, they want to keep us separated from each other. Because when we start talking to each other and we start realizing, like you're talking about yourself as a white woman, and white ladies this, and I'm thinking, but you're Irish. And the Irish have a long history of being colonized and then
Yeah.
also being the foot soldiers of colonization, right? You know, so there's a really neat exercise that people do in anti-racist workshops where you ask, where are you from? And you ask that question 3 times. Where are you from? Where are you from? Because we got to get past that kind of surface. Where am I from? And that's what becoming kin is. I'm trying to get people to pick up their own bundles. Go back into your own history. You don't have to lament and wish that you were born native because we're so cool and like little forest dwellers. You know, you don't have. You can reach back into your own history and find the things you need to make the world a better place.
It's funny, you know, the Irish, we're just remembering now that we are forest people. We've forgotten.
Well, where'd all the woods go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is the story that the
There are
British came
ships.
and chopped them down to build their warships,
Yeah.
but then Irish people had also chopped them down as well to make land to farm. So it's, you know, a lot of different stories overlapping. But the ecosystem on the west coast of Ireland is rainforest.
Really?
Irish Atlantic rainforest, but we had.
I remember the rain. I remember the rain part.
But it had been erased out of, you know, a lot of it is the forced erasure and the forgetting that we
Right.
weren't supposed to speak the Irish language.
Yes. Yeah.
And so we had all more or less forgotten, and somebody, Owen Dalton's published a book. I told him, I said, Owen, we haven't met in person, I've just been emailing and saying, I'm like on this personal crusade to share your book with America. It just came out over the winter, and I'm sure it's going to come out here soon. So it's called Irish Atlantic Rainforest. And he moved from Dublin to Clare, not Clare, but West Cork, but the West. And you know, he's
I'm gonna put my number.
rewilding, and he's through the course of doing this, he realised this is rainforest because he's seen real rainforests in other parts of the world, and what we have is exactly the same thing. It's only Irish.
Right.
And so we're just remembering that now, because the peatland, you know, the bog that I mentioned, we were calling the peats, the bogs, the Irish rainforests. And then now we're realising in the last few years, wait a minute, we actually have rainforests. So it's, it's to remember, like, if we've forgotten that we are forest people, like, what else are we missing?
Unforgetting. We have
Yes.
to unforget, you know, kind of dig back for that truth, for those histories, to remember who we are, so that then we can build on those things. Because there's a reason that these histories are forgotten. Like, I found out that the British tried to have reservations in Ireland. It didn't work. You can't put people, you know, because it was just too easy to get out of. With the geography, it just didn't work. But there were boarding schools, just like Indian residential schools. They did that in Ireland and Wales and Scotland. Like, all these strategies that they did here came from there.
Yeah, we were their first experiment.
Yeah, well, even modern policing was that what's his name went to Ireland, and then all the strategies that he used there, he brought back and created the Met in London to control the poor people that were streaming into the cities. And then that got exported to Canada and the US, you know, to conquer the frontier.
And I was just in Atlanta, Georgia. I specifically added Atlanta to the book tour because of what's going on with the Cop City, Stop Cop City. So yeah, policing has turned into this militarized. Feels like the nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
It's pretty very scary.
Yes. Yeah.
But if there are any questions, That would be lovely. I don't want to pressure
Oh.
anyone. Oh, yeah.
White shirt at the back.
Here's a chair.
I was just wondering how you reconcile natural phenomenon that you describe, like migration, with something what we term as an invasive species, like the ash borer beetle that is totally obliterated the A in your language.
Yeah, it's it makes me think of Anna Tsing's Feral Atlas. Anna Tsing wrote the book The Mushroom at the End of the World, that I think captured
I have
people's
that
imaginations. And so she's looked a lot at the actual specifics of where the beetles came from, so pallets, like shipping pallets, moving around. So it's an artificial way of transporting things. So that, again, it goes back to this capitalist system of the network of things, the objects that have to be shipped and moved around the planet, and humans do that in this unnatural way. And the shipping pallets themselves literally became home to a lot of these insects. Whereas with migration, it's something that's innate and happens naturally as part of your... for the emergence issue on migration, I actually looked inside my own body at cell migration. It was last summer, spring, summer, when they invited me to think about it, and that's when I was dealing with the beginnings of this dysautonomia, but I didn't know that's what it was. But I knew it was something to do with the inside of my body and the vagus nerve, and I was doing all this research, and I discovered that the cells, like so at a cellular level, our bodies are migrating constantly all the time. So when I was looking inside, it's, on the scale of everything is related at different scales. So when you zoom in to the inside of your body, it looks like the solar system and the universe.
Yeah,
So
it's
basically-
extraordinary.
Yeah, and so this mirroring, and it's the same with the branching of the trees, it's also the branching of our lungs, and my lungs, this CAT scan, because I've had to see all the different kinds of doctors, and so the CAT scan reveals that I have trees in butt. That's a medical term. So hopefully the CAT scan next week is going to show that they're not doing something, I don't know, like blooming or who knows. But this isn't really answering your question, but it's just to think of, to go back to this little word nature, like what is natural? So migration is something that has to be done, like the caribou have to migrate, and there are humans who have to migrate. They're forced through different circumstances and climate. We haven't really talked about the climate crisis, maybe because it's all consuming. But we're going to have Americans who are going to become climate refugees and will be migrating, and that's when it maybe really hits home. Like I saw there was Jory Cradham shared a story today a news article that Manhattan is sinking. Apparently the skyscrapers are too heavy. So we've heard this for a long time about Miami and Venice, and thought, oh, poor Miami, they're not going to be there for much longer. But New York City, you've got think of the wealth. Like when Superstorm Sandy hit, and everything went black, except for that part of Wall Street, because they had the generators to keep it alive and pumping. So what's going to happen if this concrete jungle is sinking? Because they do things like save East River Park. I have images here from some of the groups. I chained myself to a tree in City Hall Park with members. We're trying to stop the city. Again, it's individuals coming together as groups to try and stop a city or a government from destroying something precious, like a park with 1,000 mature trees. And they're like, in the name of climate resiliency, we're going to chop down 1,000 mature trees to raise everything up 6 feet. And then they're like, oh, maybe we should raise it up 8 feet with landfill, like dump a load of crap in there and then put a few little seedlings on top and say that's going to protect Manhattan from the rising seas. It's just ridiculous. So sorry, it's not really answering your question at all, but the reason ash did become the letter A in the New York City tree alphabet was specifically to talk to these issues that right now the ash trees, millions, hundreds of millions of them are dying because of this little insect that was transported unnaturally. But there's a hope. Like Ed Toth, who's at the Greenbelt Native Plant Center in Staten Island, he's since retired, but he said to me, you've got to have ash for the letter A because it's hope. And we're all about hope because they're saving the seeds. They have a seed bank, and the hope is that at some point in the future we bring back ash trees. And so with the alphabets, that's a way of maybe mentioning that I see it as a political project to have an alphabet. Which tree do you select for which letter, and why that tree, and what are the stories? And you can go down that rabbit hole to talk about the politics or not, because it's kind of a family-friendly thing. You know, at Artpark on Sunday, we hopefully have families and we'll be screen printing the alphabet, and it's like, yay, trees, look, there's the Irish tree alphabet, they're beautiful. But then you can also have conversations that maybe look at more of the darker issues, because I think that's, you know, part of this book and your book and our lives together is that not everything, I talk about love a lot, but that's at the heart of it, but then everything's complex and complicated and made up of so many more things, and you can't pretend that the bad's not there.
That's right.
You know, in the group in Ireland, for example, I was told by one of the new members, oh, we can't talk about the climate emergency. Like, look at me, I'm like a walking crazy lady. Everything's about the climate emergency, because we're in an emergency, people, come on, we're in the sirens. But she's like, we can't talk to the children about climate striking or climate action or any of that, because it will scare them. We can't talk about rights of nature. I haven't mentioned rights of nature tonight, but the subtitle of my book uses this word rewilding, because it's much easier to slip off the tongue than rights of nature. But I feel like my book is part of my campaign for rights of nature, and you know, we are nature. So if we're campaigning to save ecosystems, it's because we're campaigning to save ourselves.
We're part of that system. And that's Jessica Hernandez. She wrote a wonderful book called Fresh Banana Leaves, and she talks about invasive species as relatives out of place.
Oh, sorry, you'll go back to the question.
Yeah, just circling around. But that's what she talks about. That's how she talks about invasive species, because invasive species sounds like, burn them with fire. But recognizing that they're just relatives out of place, then that engenders a different response. That, they can't be here because just think about when you're lost and you start running around and causing drama because you're lost and you don't know what's happening. And that's what's happening with these little beings, or big being, depending on what kind of species we're talking about. And so that's how she sees them. And that, yes, they need to be dealt with, but that's a much different way of thinking about them. And I thought that was really beautiful, to think about them as relatives out of place, and that they need to be back home. And it may not be practical to just round up all the ash borers and send them back home again. She's not saying that it's that simple. It's just a much different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, all of my early works were with weeds, so it went really directly to the work that I'd done with my mother and growing up in rural Ireland and outside, hands in dirt with plants and planting. And weeding is a big part of, if you're gardening, you've got to weed. Or not, maybe, but a weed is only something that's in the wrong place. So a rose would be a weed if it's in a potato field. And so a lot of this weeding work that I was doing, it felt really urgent, like going out into city streets and weeding to pluck something, and you feel, taking the roots up, and I would transplant it. And to me, it did feel like these conversations, again, the politics of weeds, transplanting, and because I guess I'm more in conversation with non-humans, with plants. I always have been since I'm little, than with humans. So I felt that this was a direct conversation with what's happening with humans. But I didn't realize until afterwards, I needed to be more direct about that. People didn't really get that they just thought I was talking about, weeding.
Should I talk about that time I planted mint in my garden? Just like 5 of them.
Oh, and now there's mint everywhere.
I have been ripping mint out of my garden for, let's say I planted it when we first moved in, so 15 years now. I have been ripping mint out of and I just throw it up front in our yard, and you don't even have to replant it. You just throw it on the ground. And now my husband, when he mows that part of the lawn, he's like, "Oh, it smells nice up here." So bad mint relatives, you go live over there.
It's making me think of cocktails.
Yes, there was somebody had their, yes.
So I want to bring something very local. Have you had a chance to visit our eldest tree? like a block away.
Oh,
It predates any built structure of Buffalo. It's like 3 decades old.
have you been there?
I've not been there, no. I didn't even know it was there.
Yeah.
Where is it?
It's just
Well,
on
it's up for debate now, because there was also a really beautiful article in the, what was it, Buffalo Rising, that maybe the oldest tree
Well,
was.
still.
Of course, there are many oldest trees, but
Right.
maybe in the golf course is actually one of the, and by the zoo.
But there's one nearby here that we
There's one
should.
that's easy walking distance.
Yeah, formerly Franklin, yeah. Franklin, right?
It's like
Oh,
this.
neat.
It's a sycamore, yeah.
Yeah.
Sycamores are beautiful. Sycamores are really
So
beautiful.
I'd be curious if you would go there and then listen, and I'm curious what you would.
Imagine the history that tree would know,
Yeah.
right?
Thank
Watching
you.
the
I'll have
city
to
come
go.
up around it.
Yeah, that was one of the images here is of this tree museum project that I did it was a public art project commissioned by New York City with the Bronx Museum and the Parks Department in Wave Hill. And long story short, because it was a big public art project, but it was about telling stories right through trees, 100 trees for the 100 years of this street. So it was humans speaking for trees, but the trees were offering the stories, and one of them wasn't a tree at all. Well, it was the leftovers, it was the remains. So it was just the stump that was about this high and about this large. And John Pywell, the forester at the time for the Parks Department, he, looked at it as like it was over 200 years old. So he told that story, what that tree would have seen. So it would have seen Kennedy and other presidents, I think, paraded on the Grand Concourse, and it just blows your mind when you realize that these beings have been there and they stand silently just doing their thing while we're all rushing around spinning like crazy, and they're just silently, I've been here long before you crazy people making your noise. I'm thinking of parks like in Union Square Park, Washington Square Park, where there's a lot of noise that humans are doing. The trees are just, be calm, slow down, and they'll still be here, and we'll all be compost.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, Katie, about where grief plays a part in all this, because we all walk, those of us who are in love with the earth, we also walk a thin line between grief is too dark, it's not fun for kids, it's defeatist, it's like, but grief is really, I think, for those of us who've grown up with our hands in the dirt since we were born, it's really a deep part of us, but how do you manage it?
Yeah, grief. Well, Patty will have to answer that as well later. I think this was where the Sunday salons came in at home, that we knew we needed to have other people come in because Dylan and myself were just having the same conversations over and over. And I think when you're talking about something that is essentially the end of your species, so it's bigger than yourself, it's impossible to actually comprehend, really. Timothy Morton talks about it, it's a hyper object, something like climate change is larger than we can take in because it's so big. Maybe I don't have an answer because I'm still going through it all, and maybe by doing, it's a way of dealing with it. So by being busy in a way, like bringing together all these beautiful people, it means you're too busy to have those quiet moments to grieve, which is maybe a breakdown. I'll have to articulate an answer because it's very difficult and painful. I should say that the first conversation we had with the salons was actually with Royce Granton, so we didn't have them as lectures. They were more as 16 people around a table. Everyone had a voice at the table, but we did invite Royce Granton to share his work. He had written an op-ed in the New York Times that was called "Learning to Die in the Anthropocene," and was a soldier in Iraq. He would look at himself in the mirror, getting dressed into his uniform every morning, thinking, today could be the day that I die. I know that sounds like a song, but you know, he was trying to, but he was also studying English back at Princeton or somewhere. So he left the battlefield, he survived, and he came home, and then the storms happened. I can't remember which storm it was, and he realized, oh, it's not just me, my personal body that could die, it's all of us, our whole species. And he's a writer, he's able to articulate it, he wrote that beautiful piece. And so this was the beginning of our salons. That was the very first conversation we had. So it was starting in this really dark place where we have to realize that we're all already dead. It's too late. And so that's pretty dark. But I think you need to do it. It's, you know, death is just another part of life, right? Because I grew up composting, doing all of that, I know how beautiful it is. I love composting. I compost all the time, and that's how my body is. That's what's going to happen to me. I have to be composted. None of these coffin things or other things. It's about composting back into it, because it's just the cycle, and that feels very natural to me. And I'm sorry, I'm not doing justice to your question, but thank you for making me think that I realized that I should.
I think so. I actually took a pause in my book to think about grief, because I started off, I mean, like I said, going back, I wound up going all back to creation stories, looking at Canadian and American history, you know, from you know, when the settlers first came and decided to stay, and you know, looking at the ethnic cleansing of the East Coast, and you know, the genocide, and you know, the tribes who no longer exist, right? You know, like there are, you know, the Beothuk in Newfoundland no longer exist. You know, they were eradicated. A friend of mine has said that there was not a genocide in North America. There were multiple genocides, and they're ongoing. And yeah, so after writing about that for 5 chapters, that was really hard. that was really tough. And so I wrote this little interlude in the middle of the book, and I didn't mean to quote WandaVision. I've never seen it, but it starts with, "Grief is the persistence of love. It sees my ancestors in stalks of corn and hears them whisper when I pour wild rice through my hands. It fills my bag with nettles and reminds me to be gentle when I strip bark from larch or dogwood. Grief is the sound of thunder you feel deep in your chest, the lingering smell of sage hours after it is burnt. Grief is the forgetting of names. It does not know which place the ancestors' feet last touched before leaving home forever. It looks back over shoulders and sees only darkness. Stolen lives means stolen history, means no thread to pick up and follow home. Grief holds the accumulation of centuries in its hands and watches it turn to ash and then reaches out for more. Grief is consuming and consumed, an endless cycle of loss. We take a moment and pause. So much loss. So many missed opportunities for relationship and community. How can we not be overwhelmed by it? These histories, these memories, they come in like the tide, each wave pushing the ocean further inland until we're submerged. In the harbor of a nearby town, there is a hurricane protection barrier. It is a wall with a gate that protects the town from hurricanes. But as the seas continue to rise and the hurricanes become more intense, the townspeople behind this wall of rock and steel know that it won't protect them forever. And we are like this. We hold grief at bay with walls of rock and steel, fearing the time when they fail to protect us. We fear the ocean, the weight of this history we cannot change. We fear the riptides of systems we feel helpless to change. Imagining possibility seems so far away. What if we can't swim? But what if we can? And then I go on to tell the Anishinaabe flood story, because flood stories, I mean, and I don't know that, I know the Christians have a flood story, Jews, there's the flood story in Genesis. Jewish people have this too. Muslim, everybody who has the book of Genesis has that flood story. The Anishinaabe we have a flood story. I think really, I don't know that it means that there was a global flood. I think just we've all experienced catastrophic floods. But that kind of flood story teaches us how to rebuild. And it teaches us, like you say, like we're in this moment of impending catastrophic change. But we've been here before. As a species, we have experienced catastrophic change. Like when I hear people talking about the apocalypse like it's a thing in the future, as an Indigenous person, we have experienced that apocalypse. That is in our rearview mirror. We are already living the future. So we reform, we reshape, we rebuild communities. We can, in fact, survive the flood because creation has promised to take care of us. And creation keeps its promises even when we don't. So whatever comes out of this catastrophic event, I don't know. My son says to me, why did you teach me to love this world? Like, why, Mom? Why did you do that? Because he's going to miss it terribly. But what comes next may also be extraordinary. And what comes next depends very much on what we do now. So I'm not saying that, like, oh, just give up and do whatever. What comes next depends very much on what we do now. So grief, yes, absolutely. Feel the grief, acknowledge the grief, but allow it to become part of your building. Allow it to move you forward into whatever it is that we need. Yeah, at the back.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for this. And I just wanted to maybe build a little bit upon the promises of creation and so on. Looking back maybe at some of the Indigenous Andean ideas of what happens with catastrophe, where you have they've always lived through multiple pachacutis, which is time spaces and so on. So nature, creation is always going to fulfill this promise to us. And sure, humans will die, but there will be other species. And a lot of times what they talk about is that there will be a pachacuti, an end of this time space, because the world is cleansing itself. But at the end of that cleansing, people who are want to be part of establishing a new space of creation and kin relationships will return as insects. And there will be a new world, a beautiful world without these.
Interesting.
So that's, I think, also a message for hope. I think we could all come back as baby crickets or something that would be a beautiful harmony.
Cricket would be fun.
Yeah. But I think that's also another way of thinking about it. There hasn't been one apocalypse. There've always been many ones.
Many,
And
yes.
this is just one more. And,
Yes. But what comes next depends very much on what we do now. So it's important that we build and try to hold on, because that's our job. Our job is to build and to hold on and preserve what needs to be preserved.
I feel like books play such a, like for me, I'm a book lover. And
Same.
When I was little, that's how I was in the middle of rural Ireland in the 70s. I was born in 75, the same year that Talking Leaves was founded.
I was already 10.
We didn't have, the world was so different. Things have changed. You all know how things have changed. But to have a big atlas that showed planet Earth and you could turn a page.
I love atlases.
Yeah, and move your finger from here to there. So I was traveling the world through this book. I had encyclopedias, and they had text, and they would have little diagrams. And I feel the world, humans, we have to write the world that we want. I'm not a writer, so I can't sing with words. But there's just this beauty that's to be shared in books, and I feel, the grieving, all of this difficult stuff that we're going through, and we're all trying to figure out in our own ways how to live in this time of crisis, and it does feel like end times. And so for me, it was if I make a beautiful book, bring together all these people and voices and stories, it's a way to share that love and the beauty, even some difficult dark things too. And then these are the seeds, and it's, a book is a special portal or a capsule that seeds into other people, and the world will spread.
Well, understanding the darkness of our history shapes the activism of our future, right? It shows us what we're responsible for. Oh, my ancestors did those bad things? oh shoot, my job is to undo those bad things. My job is to, like a maternal family, they, fled Stalin and then, into Germany, and then came post-war refugees here into Canada, benefiting from the displacement of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe. So my maternal family benefited from that displacement. So part of my responsibility, this is a relationship that I have inherited. So then part of my responsibility is to work against further displacement. And so understanding that goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning, humans being, I think that things that we do rather than things that we are. I don't have to, be consumed with guilt for something that I never did, but I benefited from those things. I was raised by my maternal family, so I can then take that, acknowledge that, and then shape that into my activism.
Mm-hmm.
Because how transformative is that?
Yeah, I'm working
That the
with
child of somebody who displaced it, the inheritor of Indigenous displacement can then turn around and work against it. Like, is that not transformative? That's profoundly transformative.
pull out something you said is, and this is something in your book as well. So we talk about human beings. Those two words, human beings, and then you so beautifully and simply say, what about humans being?
Yeah. Humans being.
Yeah. That's it. We're all just humans being.
Yeah. And we're mostly doing our best.
Mostly.
We're mostly doing our best. Sometimes we just don't know better. Or we just don't think that there's we just don't think that there's other ways to be.
How are we doing on time? I think I don't want to keep everyone up all night long, but I could talk to you for hours.
We still have Artpark on Sunday though, so that'll be fun.
Yes, Sunday. I can't wait. I'm so excited. It's been beautiful.
We'll radicalize those kids. It'll be fine. Nobody will care.
Well, it's been beautiful being here in Hallwalls.
It has been. Thank you so much for hosting us.
I just can't wait to be with you outside under the trees.
Under the trees. I'm excited to learn bookbinding.
Can I just say, it was great having you. I'm from Hallwalls, I'm Ed. And it was a great event, and thank you for coming and thank the folks at Artpark for organizing it. I want to say that while the book signing is going on afterwards, the gallery is open upstairs. So our exhibition that opened last Friday, people can go up and see it once they get their books and get them signed.
Super, thank you.
And I'll close
Thank
it
you.
later. Yeah.
Excited.